If a palace servant made him angry, he'd just have him killed.
Oh.
And so he was a bloodthirsty, brutal, sort of the worst of you can imagine a king to be. Well, hello everyone. This is Mark Peterson on the Frog Outside the Well Research Center, and my guest today,
Chad from the High Chad
from
channel.
High Chad channel.
Yeah.
And we just did a High Chad thing on looking at the movie
Gwanghae.
Yeah. In English, Masquerade.
Masquerade.
If you want to look it up, Masquerade. It's a fun movie. And
very fun.
Just to recap what we talked about there, it's not really a historical movie of 광해군은 and his reign.
Correct.
It's a movie with a lot of intrigue and such. And my first response as we were getting into it, and I realized this is Hollywood.
This seems
seems
a little far-fetched.
Yeah, and we said at the beginning of your thing that Koreans are very good at now at doing historical movies, and the Lee Sun-shin movie was really excellent as a historical piece. But this one, it could have been anybody. It's not really particularly Gwanghae except for a couple of obscure references. But the movie works as a Hollywood movie. Lives, he's gonna die. She's gonna live. She's gonna die. And you know, who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy?
I think it was very enjoyable.
Yeah.
And so I think it served its purpose.
Yeah, a fun movie. But it didn't really touch on Gwanghae so much. But that's what we were going to talk about in this segment is the Gwanghae. You can tell by the title Gun was never made a king. He was a king. He ruled for how many years? He was on the throne for, oh my goodness, he was on the throne for 15 years.
Okay.
But was not a king.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Korean historiography and the honorifics, you have people that were never kings, never on the throne, and they're made kings.
Right.
Posthumously.
Yeah, yeah.
And that you have real kings. And he was one of the two real kings that served. He served for 15 years, but was deposed. And he was the second king. The first one was Yeonsan-gun. Now, he said in the movie he was the 15th king. I guess that's right. Yeonsan-gun, he's 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, no, 10. The 10th king, Yeonsan-gun, he was the other one that was deposed. And, you know, all the Korean kings are Sejo or Sejong or Taejong or Kojong. It's either a Jo or a Jong ending. But Yeonsan-gun and Gwanghae never got that posthumous title.
Right.
And they were never enshrined in the Cheongmyo.
Okay.
The Cheongmyo is one of the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. It's right downtown Seoul.
Yep.
And it's this big, long building with all these different rooms for all the different kings. There's not a room for Gwanghae and there's not a room for Yeonsan-gun.
Interesting.
Because they were given the boot.
Right, right.
Now, Yeonsan-gun deserved it. Yeonsan-gun was a bad dude. And he was crazy. And he killed people capriciously.
Okay.
If a palace servant made him angry, he'd just have him killed.
Oh.
And so he was a bloodthirsty, brutal, sort of the worst of you can imagine a king to be. And so he was, and then he went on these purges where he went after the court, who has the legal right to criticize the king. Samsa, the three officers of remonstrance, where they put young, bright scholars that just passed the exam in there, and they're supposed to be lecturing the king every day. And the king is supposed to listen to this. And they'll say, you appointed Kim so-and-so to be the governor of Gyeongsang province. When he was the magistrate of such a county, he was taking bribes like crazy. You shouldn't appoint him. He shouldn't be appointed. And the king would usually say, no, those were rumors. It wasn't true. It was never proven. He's a good man. Then the next day, another censor would come and say, you shouldn't have appointed this guy. And then the third day, they'll say, you shouldn't have. And the king, okay, we'll rescind his appointment and appoint someone else. So the king, the Korean court was unique in its having to listen to remonstrant.
Right.
It was in the Chinese court, but the Chinese court didn't do it as much as the Korean court did. And this gave real power to the court as opposed to the king.
Yeah, that's interesting that the king kind of has to be subject basically to what the court wants.
I call it early elements of democracy. It's a kind of a check and balance,
right.
which is the heart of democracy. So Yeonsan-gun didn't like this. and would strike out against the court for criticizing him. And he went through 3 purges where he just got rid of a wholesale bunch of people, but it didn't work. Eventually the court rose up and deposed him. Gwanghae, it was over fairly minor things. There's suspicions that he killed a brother to get to the court.
Okay.
Well, a few of these other boys have killed their brothers to get to the court. Number 2, Taejong killed 2 of his brothers to get to the court.
Okay.
Sejong killed a nephew and several other people to get to the throne. But Gwanghae, that was a fairly minor indiscretion that really came up and bit him. The other thing was he seemed to be somewhat sympathetic to the Manchus. And the court, dominated by the Western faction, he was more with the Northern faction that was more sympathetic to the working with the Manchus. And eventually the Manchus come over. They win. Yeah. And historically, one of the unfortunate things about this that I like to talk about a lot is the invasions. I think Korea historically exaggerates the invasions. The Japanese invasion and the Manchu invasion, they were totally different invasions. Totally different. Okay. The Japanese, when they came in, they just killed and plundered and stole and robbed and raped and pillaged and just did everything they wanted to do. Yeah. And somewhere between 2 million and 4 million people died. Wow. At the hands of the Japanese. Oh my gosh. The Manchus was completely different. They came in once in 1627, just after Gwanghae was deposed, 4 years after. They came in on their way to China, and they in effect said, look, we want Korea to be our ally while we go into China, so we don't want any trouble over here from y'all while we're going into China. And the Korean court, still beat up from the Japanese invasions, was not in a position to argue with the Manchus. So they said, okay, we'll recognize the Qing court. And they left.
Interesting.
They just left. They didn't go through raping and pillaging and that. There was one soldier, or one general, who did take his army on one pillaging mission. And he was relieved of his command and disciplined for doing that. So the Manchus were very, very different from the Japanese. Okay. And they came in 1627. And the king was Gwanghae-gun's brother, Injo, says, okay, we'll recognize you. And they left. And then he says, hey, we've got to go to Ming, China, and tell them we've been forced into this relationship with the Manchus. We don't want this. And then China and we have to attack them together. Well, they were both so beat up they couldn't put together the attack. The Manchus found out about this and came back in the second time. That's why there were 2 Manchu invasions, 1627 and 1636. And when they came in the second time, this time they said, hey, king, you promised you'd recognize us, and you went sneaking off to China. Right. This time, to make sure you recognize us, we want hostages. And hostages were a common thing in the old days. Shilla dynasty, all of them kept hostages of the subjugated power to make sure that they would obey. The hostage was always the crown prince. A member of the royal family. Wow. So that the king, if he rises up, he's going to lose his son. Right. So this time they said, okay, we trusted you last time, Korea. Yeah. We don't trust you this time. We're taking 3 hostages. And they took the 3 sons of the king. They took them to Manchuria, to Shenyang, now the city of Shenyang. And then when they took over China, they took them down into Beijing, but there they released them. Safe. They came home. They said, Korea, thank you, you're our ally. And so the number of people that died during the Manchu invasions compared to the 2 or 4 million was minuscule. Right. The famous people that died were those that committed suicide rather than facing the Manchus. Okay. So it wasn't so much battle conflict as this ideological conflict. And that was the part that the Gwanghae was a victim of. Because he said, let's try to get along with the Northerners. And these people said, no, that's
so it was more of a political reasons for being deposed than he did something so terrible. Yeah. Okay. Yun Sang-gun did a lot of terrible things. He should have gotten the boot. Gwanghae, maybe he shouldn't have gotten the boot. And he lived on, he deposed in 1623 and he died in 41, lived, 18 years? He lived for 18 years in Jeju Island. That's not a bad place to live 18 years. Yeah. I would too. If I ever get in trouble here, send me to Jeju Island. Send me to Jeju. I'll stay there forever.
So, of course, it was a great punishment. It was a shameful thing for him, etc. But he survived and was not really that bad of a dude. And so I thought that's what this movie was going to be about. But it was a Hollywood interpretation of a bit of intrigue.
It was really about somebody who replaced Gwanghae for a little while. So we
made it a great movie. It was a lot of fun. Yeah. But we thought we'd just capture a little bit of what the story was about, what it could have been about. because Gwanghae was an interesting figure, and he led up to the period of the Manchu invasions. So on the Manchu invasions again, I like to play the story of, hey, Korea, don't be the victim. Those two invasions the two invasions by the Manchus were very, very different from the invasions by the Japanese.
Interesting.
And yet, most Koreans, when they talk about these invasions, they say, oh, we were invaded by the Japanese, invaded by the Manchus. But qualitatively, they were very, very different.
A little bit different, okay.
Yeah, very different.
Okay.
So, anyway, that's my input, my take on
that's interesting. Well, it's fun to learn the real history side after
the true story.
The true story. With the frog outside the well.
By the frog outside the well. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't yet signed up, subscribe over here for for my channel, and we'll see you again next time. And thanks to Chad. Hi, Chad, for coming in.
Yeah, good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you guys.
See ya.